Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to all of you. I'm Anil Chopra, VP Research and Consulting at Cybermedia Research, and your host for today's webinar on cybersecurity in manufacturing best practices. This webinar series that we do is a part of the DQ's capacity building and information sharing initiative, where we kind of bring you experts from the industry to talk about technology trends, the latest developments, some of the CIO challenges, as how-to training programs and strategy sessions. Now, in today's session, we have with us, three distinguished guests. Right now, two have joined us. I'll introduce them to you shortly. And who have a lot of experience across enterprise IT, operational technology, cybersecurity. So we'll be having an interesting interaction and session with them later on today. But just to kind of set the context, traditionally OT security, OT cybersecurity, was not really necessary because OT systems were not connected to the internet. Now, as such, they were not exposed to outside threats as a result. But with digital innovation initiatives coming in and IT and OT networks getting converged, organizations tended to bolt on specific point solutions to kind of address these issues that arise in terms of risk and security. The network complexity increased, and solutions could not really share information and provide full visibility. So I think a number of things happened in security with the integration of IT and OT, and we're going to have an in-depth discussion around OT security, best practices, some of the challenges, how do you really gain full visibility into the combined entity or IT/OT network. And so we're going to do that today in today's webinar. And before I start, just a couple of housekeeping notes. So for the duration of this webinar, all participants are going to be in listen-only mode. However, you'll be able to send questions through chat. So do send your questions on chat so that at the end of the webinar, in the end, we'll probably take up some of those questions and have a discussion around those. Depending on obviously how much time we have available. Your feedback is very, very important for us. And so I would request you all to submit it at the end of the webinar. You'll probably get a link. And to make this session more interactive, we'll also be doing, having a poll during the session. So you can just select the option and, send us your response. And that will kind of help us also give some food for thought on, on our discussions on how you feel around security on this topic. So without further delay, I would now, first of all, like to invite Aasef Iqbal. Aasef is a senior specialist for OT cybersecurity at Fortinet to kickstart the session with his presentation. And after that, we're going to have a panel with all the experts coming in and discussing on this topic in more in-depth detail and probably do a Q&A after that. Thank you, and over to you, Aasef.
Thank you, Mr. Anil, and good morning, everyone. This is going to be a very quick presentation, and I'll be taking you through some of the best practices in general for ICS and OT, and then we'll talk about some of the specific use cases in the manufacturing industry, how they apply in terms of cybersecurity implementation as well as management of those controls. So for the rest of the session, I'll be switching off my camera just to preserve the internet bandwidth and have the smooth transition for the slides. So my name is Aasef Iqbal. I'm based in Dubai, and I basically work for Fortinet, Middle East, Europe, and Africa region as solution architect and senior specialist for OT cybersecurity. And I have been in the industry over 20 years now, which includes 15 years into the oil and gas, energy, which is basically electricity and generation, transmission, and distribution, and manufacturing vertical. And I'm also a member of the ISO 99 Standards Committee, and I'm also a certified expert on the ISO 99 standard, or what we typically know as IEC 62443. Moving on to this session after my presentation, I would like to start with this slide. We really use this slide as a, I would say, segue to the rest of the session. And what's interesting in the slide is these two specific incidents I'm going to talk about. One is the SolarWinds incident that happened around end of 2020, which we know as a massive and largest hack of the industry in the ICS as well as enterprise domain, and we still yet to know how much damage it caused. Likewise, the second incident, which is the most recent incident in the industry, is the attempted poisoning of Tampa water supply in Florida. So Florida has a water supply system in the Oldsmar County, and there was an attempted, basically, I would say, a cyber event where a hacker tried to manipulate chemicals in the water supply, which we typically call a lye or sodium chloride or some chemical compound. So ultimately, it was observed by the operator, and then it was stopped. Otherwise, would have been a very massive damage, even could have caused the damage to the human life. So we'll see these two incidents that are very specific to the ICS and OT industry and applies to the manufacturing industry and manufacturing vertical as well. So talking about the first incident itself, this is how really it looks like in the manufacturing domain. So we have plant floor, production floor, where we have all the electromechanical devices, robotic arms, production belts, and all those manufacturing production lines. Likewise, those production lines are controlled through various systems like sensors, could be a physical monitoring of those devices, could be PLCs and RTUs that are basically doing the batch scheduling and etc. And all these things are accessible through the HMI. Now, in the current situation where we have COVID kind of a lockdown and restrictions, a lot of remote engineers try to work remotely and access these systems through internet or remote desktop or VNC connection and etc. There are many ways of accessing those systems remotely, and then that's what was done in the Oldsmar case. The operator had the access, however, that access was exploited by the hacker. And what really happened is that the attacker got access into the facility and then tried to manipulate some of the chemical compound through the HMI, which could have basically exploited the system and could have caused poisoning of water supply system and could have caused a damage to the community even. So typically this is how in the remote operations environment for a manufacturing industry looks like. We have a remote desktop, we have monitoring and diagnostics or MND from the automation vendors who want to access and acquire some of the logs and records and retrieve some of the data from those systems remotely. Likewise, in some cases, you may have automation vendor who want to do some maintenance and troubleshooting. And it's very common, not just as part of the COVID case, but in general, where we have a connected manufacturing plant, we have this kind of access available there for the remote engineers to operate. Now, what happens in this? The malicious actor could exploit that and gain access to the systems and can really potentially cause damage to this environment on the plant or production floor. And there are ways to protect that, and it requires multiple security controls, and we are going to explore that in the few slides. In terms of the second attack, it's slightly complex in nature. It's called a supply chain attack. In the previous case, it's a simple attack, remote access exploitation, gaining access remotely. In the second attack, it's slightly complex. It takes two stages for this attack to happen. And this attack basically was the outcome of exploiting SolarWinds vulnerability by the malicious actor. So in this, what happens? The malicious actor basically does not directly attack the facility or compromise the facility or manufacturing plant here. The malicious actor takes advantage of the supply chain vulnerabilities or supply chain platform. So you may have some suppliers that providing HMI software or PLC firmwares or updates for the sensors or CCTV. In some cases, you may have IIoT controllers here, which may have firmware updates. So what typically happens, all those automation vendors will have a repository of publishing those softwares on the internet or somewhere on a secure channel. So what the malicious actor does, it creates a malicious code, compromises, let's say, software library of the service provider or software vendor. Could be Emerson, could be ABB, could be Yokogawa, anything else. I don't want to name them who it was compromised, but in this case, it was SolarWinds for this particular attack and Microsoft. So this legitimate code is coupled with the malicious code and published in the compromised software distribution library. And what happens after that? A novice or innocent engineer downloads that software and then potentially infects all the systems connected in the network, which ultimately compromises these plant floor or production floor systems and creates. So these systems, once that did not have any vulnerabilities, now they got vulnerabilities because of the action from this innocent engineer who just downloaded this compromised software distribution and published into the system. And what really happens as part of stage 1, the malicious actor exploits the service provider and software vendor here, manipulates the legitimate code with the malicious code, exploits the digital certificate and trust. So as if it's a legitimate code, it looks like to the engineer that it's a legitimate code. The engineer downloads that library and then publishes in the system. And the code basically impersonates as legitimate software in these systems. But ultimately, it's creating a backdoor here, and then the systems is what all the systems below in the plant and production floor are vulnerable to that backdoor. And what happens in this stage 2, the malicious actor has an access to all those systems with full control and has access to all those resources. So it's a slightly complex attack. However, it's happening, and we have seen the cases happening of these into manufacturing environment, into the production facilities, discrete production facilities, batch production facilities, and it's happening all over the place. And likewise here as well, you would require multiple security controls in each layer to protect from these attacks. So these were two recent past attacks just happened last week and last week in the beginning of year around December 2020. So these were 2 specific attacks. One was related with remote exploitation, other was supply chain exploitation. And this is going to grow. We will have in the production floor all these devices and users coming up. They may be available in the campus, branch, or factory, or remote mobile workforce. Could be a remote office where the user is joining from the remote office and working into the ecosystem. Could be a customer who wants to access that facility, or partners like I've given the case of any automation vendor accessing the facility and providing some troubleshooting and maintenance. And they will access all these things through the network and to the compute. And it's going to grow in terms of its edges and in terms of its access points. So you have access point here, you have access point here, and you have resources in the compute, you have resources on the network, and you have users and devices that would require security controls as well. Likewise, the best way to protect this is basically the industry outlook looks like as a zero trust access. We need zero trust access on all these potential endpoints and users. What you see on the screen, it could be a home user, it could be a mobile that wants to connect to the network, it could be a multi-cloud infrastructure using cloud services for maybe optimization purpose, it could be IoT sensor or industrial control system or operational technology devices that are connected to the network. What really it entails is that knowing and controlling everyone and everything on and off the network, which is on the network and which is off the network, and ensuring consistent security policy across on-network and off-network assets and devices. More guidance is available in a recent publication from NIST here. It's known as NIST SP 800-207 Zero Trust Architecture, and you can find more details about that. How to implement Zero Trust architecture is very easy, but it's complex in terms of implementation cycles, and it's known as defense in depth cybersecurity in terms of security implementation practices. And it really comes from older methodology of how we used to protect castles and buildings and critical assets of any infrastructure. So we used to have multiple defenses for protecting those buildings and assets. Likewise, in the network or technology world, we have multiple systems or multiple implementations that would require security controls. For example, data, application, host, and network. And we need multiple layers of these controls. This is also known as onion model, also known as layered security. But the challenge comes in how do you implement layered security in the ICS and OT environment, and especially when it pertains to implementing these controls in the manufacturing domain. And there are some good practices. So it starts with the planning and strategy. We need to identify the attacker's intent, capability, and opportunity. And that basically falls in the criteria of identifying the threats and vulnerabilities. So we need to identify if we have vulnerability in supply chain, we have vulnerability or threat coming from the remote access, and we need to identify all that. After that, we need to map all those things to specific security controls. Those security controls could be specific to people, specific to process, or specific to technology. And then we have multiple standards providing all those different security control requirements. Likewise, this is the planning phase. When it comes to the strategy point of view, it's a proactive approach. So we need to identify the assets, apply security control, perform vulnerability management, perform incident response, identify lessons learned, and then basically after that, you have the policies and procedures that basically forms the criteria of governance and management in terms of security implementation. And also, we need to provide security training and awareness. To summarize all this, these are 5 key security controls identified by the Department of Homeland Security for protecting critical infrastructure. First, basically identify, minimize, and secure all network connections to the ISS and OT, which again I talked about previously, is known as zero trust network access or zero trust access into the ICS and OT environment. Second, control, harden the ICS and supporting systems by disabling unnecessary services, ports, and protocols, enable available security features, and implement robust configuration management practices. So this point is very specific for security hygiene. So it doesn't have to be always implementing security technologies, buying firewalls, buying endpoint security, buying antivirus, and etc. A lot of security controls can be implemented by just performing security hygiene. So second point is really the internal security hygiene. How do you really perform internal security hardening of the systems? The third point talks about continually monitoring and assess the security of the ICS and OT environment, networks and connections. So centralized reporting, monitoring, and logging falls into this criteria. The fourth one is very important, which talks about implement a risk-based defense in-depth approach to securing ICS and OT systems and networks. And we'll see an example of how that can be implemented through Fortinet technologies in upcoming slides. Fifth is slightly tricky, and when we need to deal with the humans in terms of security implementation or in terms of governance, it's always tricky. The fifth point is basically related to the human or related to the, I would say, workforce. Manage the human, clearly identify requirements for ICS OT, establish expectation for performance, hold individual accountable for their performance. So if they are not following security best practices, if they are not following security hygiene, give them warnings, make them responsible for that. Establish policies and provide ICS and OT security training, which is utmost important. If you do not provide security training, they may fall prey to the remote access attacks. They may fall prey to the what we have seen example of supply chain attack, and they could really cause damage to the critical infrastructure. It could be a critical manufacturing, or it could be a large plant providing some critical services like water and energy or electricity. So provide security training for all operators and administrators. To summarize, it falls into these 3 domains: people, process, and technology. What do we need to do from the people point of view? Security governance, security awareness, security culture. From the process point of view, we need to perform risk assessment, security architecture, and compliance and audit. Guidance is available in the ISO 27001, ISO 62443, NIST 882, NIST 853, NIST 800 specific IR 7628 for energy and utilities. So there are many guidance, or I would say best practice and standards available for this specific purpose in the ICS and OT environment. From the technology point of view, you need to choose visibility control and actionable intelligence-oriented technology that can be integrated, and Fortinet has a good portfolio of that technology available through its solutions. Now, at the CISO level, we need to manage risk ultimately from the business context, and on the operator level or engineer level, on technical level, we need to automate operations. So not just the operations in the ICS and OT environment that we typically do, like control centers and etc. We need to also automate the security operations, like security operations center or network operations center, etc. This comes one big challenge. Really, the challenge lies into the complexity, cost, and slow response when we want to implement defense in depth. And this is a study conducted by Ponemon Institute. Organizations typically deploy on an average of almost 47 separate security solutions and technologies. So imagine you already have a manufacturing plant which already has HMIs and other technologies and various other controllers. On the top of that, you need security implementation in the form of defense in depth. So you will end up implementing 47 different technologies. And this really causes problem of managing those technologies, which is multiple point products, will generate too many alerts, and then will really impede the response, and it will become slow. Likewise, there is a shortage of trained staff who really understand the ICS and OT as well as security. So this is another challenge. And ultimately, it looks like 75% of the organizations state their security teams struggle to respond to security incidents within 24 hours. So imagine if you have a remote access attack or supply chain attack, the team will not be able to know within 24 hours if the attack is happening or the attack is already had happened. So the operator or security analyst doesn't want to be in this position. As you see on this screen, when there is a security attack is happening and the person is really reading the incident response guidelines. So that's too late for a manufacturing plant to come back and operate when we have security solutions that are not integrated and they operate on silo or they operate with too many alerts which are not easy to digest and understand. What Fortinet offers is a broad integrated and automated platform that is based on industry standards, and the platform is known as Fortinet Security Fabric. It provides a broad visibility and protection of the entire digital attack surface to better manage risk, an integrated approach for solution that reduces management complexity and shares threat intelligence across different solution portfolios. Likewise, I have mentioned about automating the security operations. So it provides automated self-healing networks with AI-driven security for fast and efficient operations. There are various solutions in the Fortinet Security Fabric, and you can really look into Fortinet.com website. We could have a separate discussion on this. However, we're almost into this session. To summarize these topics that I've talked about, follow risk-based approach. Defense in depth is doable for ICS and OT, and we are available here. Likewise, many experts are available in the industry who you can reach out and they can provide guidance on that first point. Second point, balance cybersecurity investment across people, process, and technology. It doesn't have to be always technology. You can improve certain processes, follow certain security hygiene and best practices, and improve your security posture. Likewise, you can also train your security people with security awareness trainings and security principles, and they can be a good asset in terms of good security posture in the organizations. Likewise, the key important point is that if you are choosing a security solution or implementing any security solutions, look for automated or integrated approach. So cybersecurity automation is a key. Adopt an integrated and automated cybersecurity platform so it can provide you actionable intelligence at the right time. That's about from me, and we are almost into the session. If you have any questions, we can discuss that during the panel discussion. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you, Aasef, for the wonderful presentation and taking us through all the security essentials, some of those major security attacks that have actually happened, and I'm sure that some of this is going to be serving as a trigger to the discussion that will be happening on our panel. Before we start the panel, we're going to run a quick poll. So I would appreciate if Ashok can kind of run the poll, and please provide your answers, as your responses again will also give us some food for thought for our discussion. Can we have the poll, please? Okay, so which of the following is the #1 criteria for your cybersecurity technology selection process? Is there advanced feature for securing ICS OT infrastructure, or is it cost effective even if some of the advanced features are not available? We have about a minute. Thank you. So there's the answer. Advanced features for securing ICS OT infrastructure seems to be the top criteria for cybersecurity technology selection process. So,
and if I add to that, it's really becoming a trend now that the manufacturing industry especially is looking for more advanced features as compared to what was used to be the case in, let's say, 10 years back. Just bring a firewall that really inspects the basic protocols. But now the trend is, because the attacks are becoming more and more improvised, we need more better security solution that understands advanced attack techniques and etc. So that's really evident here on the poll.
Okay, yeah, that's good to hear, and it's very encouraging that there are considerations happening, which basically means that awareness of security and cyber attacks is actually going up. Thanks, Aasef. Thanks once again. Now it's time to move forward with our panel discussion to discuss some of the best practices in cybersecurity in the manufacturing, and we'll now get insights directly from the CIOs from the manufacturing segment. And our first panelist is, of course, Aasef. Welcome for the panel. I'd like to invite Mr. Ranganathan Iyer, who's a group CIO and EVP-IT at JBM Group. So welcome, Mr. Ranganathan. We can't hear you, Mr. Ranganathan.
Yeah, namaste.
Okay, great. Okay. And we have Srikanth Subbu. He's the CISO for the TVS Motor Company. So, Srikanth, could you please switch on your webcam so that we can all see you? Hello, Srikanth.
Yeah.
Ah, great. Hi, welcome, Srikanth.
Hi, Srikanth. How are you doing?
Hi, we can't hear you. Can you say something? We just want to check that it's fine.
Yeah.
We can't hear you. Are you on mute?
No, I am able to hear. Hello.
No, it's a little.
It's very low. It's not really audible. So maybe the microphone, probably you need to bring slightly near or something, or increase the volume.
Yeah. No, we can't hear you.
Can you hear? Hello.
This is better.
Hello.
Yeah, it's fine now. Well, welcome, Srikanth, and welcome, gentlemen, for this panel. And just to kind of briefly set the context onto our discussion, I think Aasef kind of also set the stage very well in terms of talking about some of the, taking us through right from the threats to how these solutions and all are evolving to combat against those threats. And indeed, I mean, if I look at this entire Industry 4.0 and smart manufacturing and this entire trend, it has brought a lot of benefits to us, like, more agility and maybe, greater efficiency and all. But along with that, I think it's also brought a lot of operational risks, right? And that's probably because because of the convergence of the IT and OT networks, and that has kind of expanded the threat vectors. And as Aasef also mentioned, and of course, a lot of global reports are there. Fortinet also, I think, has some really good reports around some of these cyber threats and security trends in the manufacturing space, that it's all, the number of incidents is increasing and becoming more and more complex over the, for a long time. I think over the past 2 years with the integration, it has gone up like anything, although the timeline that Aasef shared was from, I think, 2010.
Yes, it's almost like a decade, more than a decade.
So this trend has only gone up. Number of security threats have only gone up, and so there's obviously now a need to kind of examine this entire visibility, the level of control, and situational awareness of the entire OT security of our company, and how it's going to impact the manufacturing setup, and what should be the approach to doing it. And and I think it's good to have this discussion. It's a very important topic, and I'm going to, now start off, and maybe with you, Mr. Iyer, in terms of, you heard Aasef talk about some of the, global threats and that have taken place. Now, what do you think are some of the OT security specific issues that are, being faced by, manufacturers? Share your experiences in India and maybe, in your own company in terms of some OT security specific issues and the key trends that are actually impacting the entire security strategy in the manufacturing space. So we'll start off with you, Mr. Iyer.
Before we go on to that threat, etc., the fundamental approach difference is the fear factor, because we are not exposed to the outside world as a manufacturers till date. Earlier, we had maintenance which was happening where machine was collecting data. It is not new, but normally the people who are responsible for maintenance, they come to our office, collect the data, do the analysis, and then set that right. Because of pandemic, what has happened is the physical availability of that person is eliminated. This means for those people who are wanted the machine to be up and running, they are now exposed to the outside world through net. We are supposed to share our data, so we are vulnerable, which has created the fear in the minds of manufacturing people. To be very honest, that is number one. Because of this fear factor, what is happening? Let's try to understand that there are three different things are happening. Number one, we are connecting machines. Earlier we were not doing. We were doing to a limited extent because of many technology available across. We are collecting data from different machines, drawing out intelligence, but we are keeping everything within that factory. That's on the second point. Number third one is surveillance is also helping us in many ways, not only to have pandemic related, but also related to the security related, because we have certain areas where we wanted to ensure that people with the proper PPE are moving so that the security is also increased. This also means if we are exposing ourselves to the outside world, we are much more vulnerable than earlier. We are trying to come out from that barrier. Whether we are having security product, we do not have security product. If anything is going to happen, it is going to happen. So we are spending part. I am not going to talk now. The mindset change has come. That's number one. Number two, we have understood that we have to do on a remote maintenance. Number one, remote machine maintenance. Over and above, monitoring is also going to happen. These two categories which has created as the environment to bring in more security related product coming in. So as of now, I don't want to go much more than this.
No, thanks. I think very relevant points that you've added. One very critical thing was that now fear has actually come in amongst people because of this connectivity and data being sent across over the internet, the OT data maybe. So that is resulting in fear, and of course this entire remote maintenance makes systems more vulnerable. So probably that's also another reason why fear has actually come in. So thanks. I think very valid inputs from you. Srikanth, what are your views around some of the OT security specific issues that manufacturers in India are facing?
Can you hear me now? Hello? Can you hear me?
Hi, Srikanth, we can't hear you. Hello, we can't hear you.
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
You can able to hear? Hello.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry for some glitches in my system speakers. See, are you able to hear? Hello.
Yes,
Yes,
you are
we
clear.
can hear you.
Yeah. See, some of the challenges in manufacturing is is the industry vulnerable or threat vector? That is another challenge is there. See, as Ashish said, there are people, process, and technology is the main area where the challenges in manufacturing. Since there are IT and OT areas, different convergence are there. So we have to be very much see the environment, as well as we have, since IT areas are already protected, now the OT areas are majorly looking after, because a lot of recent attacks happen, like Honda and all the recent attack happens. A lot of areas in the OT area, from OT area, they are trying to steal the data, some kind of thing. So how the security posture in the technology in OT area should be majorly, we have to think, and people awareness, people how they are approaching that, because in the OT area there are a lot of legitimate systems are there, which are very old systems, which doesn't have a password reset or a patch updation. The kind of things are there. So how their awareness to the people also to be main thing, and technology where we recently a lot of IoT related systems are there, robotic systems are there, which are connected to the external as well as internal systems. How their vulnerabilities are, those things and all we have to look after the security challenge areas. That's what I.
Okay, so I think you are also pretty much in agreement in terms of the integration of IT and OT and the need to kind of be look after the security and ensuring security
Exactly.
of integrated system. So thanks for that. Aasef, you talked about a number of global trends and some of those real breaches, which are a lot of them are around the utility space, right? Like water, poisoning of the water, and things of that nature. What are the trends that you're seeing as far as these security specific issues and OT are concerned in India and some of the Indian manufacturers, beyond just the home utilities companies?
Yes, so I'll really add to the details shared by Mr. Iyer. So that's a very positive point, that ultimately we classify that as connectivity. So connectivity is increased because of the reason could be COVID, lockdown, could be somebody wants to exchange data to the other side, because there are some global manufacturing plants that have interconnectivities between different regions, and they still utilize internet for connectivity purpose. Some may have VPN, some may not have VPN, and that's again exploitable. So going back to your point, like how really it affects or applies to the basic manufacturing. So I would divide into two areas. You may have manufacturing which may not be a critical infrastructure. For example, a toy manufacturing company, you may not call it as a critical infrastructure, but you may have a manufacturing company, let's say, that is manufacturing COVID vaccine. It's again a manufacturing facility, but it's a critical infrastructure, because now in current time you need to produce a batch of vaccinations and jabs. And let's say somebody, because malicious actor does not have any logic of human kind of, they just want to have some motivation, some intent driven mechanics into their mind, and they will exploit that. And they will exploit some ecosystem like a manufacturing plant that is manufacturing vaccinations and jabs for COVID, and they will cause damage for human life. Vaccinations are needed, but it's attack on a critical infrastructure. Likewise, that malicious actor could attack a toy manufacturing company, which is not a critical infrastructure, but ultimately causing a damage to the owner, because they will lose the revenue. And that toy manufacturing company could be locally based in India, or could be a Lego plant based in Sweden. So these are two different dimensions. The attack vector will not change. The motivation of attacker, the intent of attacker will not change. And from as an owner of a factory or as a plant, we need to just change the probability of that attack happening, because we cannot change the capability of the attacker. We cannot change his intent or motivation. What we can reduce is the probability of that attack happening by ensuring that our security controls are available. People are mature, that they are not really, as Mr. I think Iyer highlighted, or the other gentleman highlighted, that there are legacy systems we are running that could be running on an older platform like Windows XP. And I have seen some plants running Windows XP because they cannot change the HMI, because that was designed for 30 years back for that specific HMI. So we need to educate that people that you cannot really plug a USB in Windows XP system, or you cannot really apply a patch in Windows XP system, because it may just shut down the plant, or it may just exploit some vulnerability in that system. So these are various angles we need to look at, and it starts from the process and people point of view before even going to the technology part of it.
So good. I think you again brought in the people and process aspect of it, which brings me actually to the next question, which is about the need to kind of now drive OT's security specific programs, and maybe having some sort of a governance structure from design to rollout of making sure that the entire system is secure and people and processes are in place. Mr. Iyer, what are your views around having such a program and a governance structure for OT security? We can't hear you, Mr. Iyer. I think you are muted.
Sorry for that. Hope you can hear me now.
Yeah.
The mindset is number one. In the manufacturing, despite we have various other facilities available for security, spending and getting the approval is one of the critical factor, which is very difficult for us. Although for all the machines we are having insurance, if fire is happening, they are protected with that. So using that as a base, we are trying to get the funds first. We are going to talk about again three different critical activities where we wanted to protect. It is not about security, not about people stopping our production or something like that. It is about protecting our data not to be pilfered out, because we are working with many OEMs. We have some NDAs already in place. So we have to know who is doing what, whether it is moves away from us, from employee or within our periphery. We need to have that history of activities. That is rather more critical for us, because today data is moving to cloud, number one. And engineering drawings, earlier we used to get from our customers, we do and then hand it over physically. That is also happening in the collaboration mode. Number three, for visibility of the whole process for internal management consumption, because we are having multiple plants across, and it is very difficult for management to see a plant wise. So we bring it to the cloud. So vulnerability of data pilferage is more. So we are focusing more on who is doing what, how it is getting moved, what is happening part. Subsequently, we will do, because we have 40 plus plans, and bringing latest security put on to our existing is going to be on the phased manner. So this is where we stand. Yes, we understand it is very important, very crucial. To larger extent, we are trying to protect it, but still we are vulnerable. That's what I wanted to conclude.
But yeah, I think your point about having a mindset change is, I think, very critical to kind of have a governance structure and have a systematic phased approach to identify what is really important to be protected, and then kind of have a phased approach and rolling it out across plants to secure the entire data that you work with so many OEMs. So good points. Srikanth, one question I have for you is, how do you see, I mean, you talk, Mr. Iyer also, referred to multiple things in terms of, migration to the cloud also he referred to, and in terms of changing the mindset, and, there are so many plants to protect. How are you seeing the IT/OT security architecture evolving? Because now that there is integration happening, how do you really see this architecture evolving?
Hello, Anil. Can you hear me?
We can. Yes.
Yeah. See how we are evolving is like something like we should have a proper architecture. What I said as like a two-tier architecture, where we have to segregate the IT/OT areas, and we have to have proper governance and risk. We have to follow that kind of procedure, and we should also know what are the resources, kind of like what since IT area we might have that lot of assets and asset resources, but in the OT area also we should have a proper resources and the people, how to invest on that, what kind of risk methodology we have to follow that, and what are the technologies involved in that, and based on that you should develop a solution to better visibility on the key components on that. And we should have a proper insight on industry, because the person should understand the inside of the industries, machines, and prepare a proper framework based on the technology and governance, and adopt a control over that. That's what the main area. But since a lot of digital business is happening over there, we should have a proper control by doing a risk assessment or risk methodology on the OT side also. So that is what establish a proper security governance in the area should be a major thing in your NMC.
Okay.
Yeah.
So good point. I think from a governance point of view and also from a security architecture point of view, I think you mentioned having a framework is very, very important
Yeah,
to
exactly.
have it,
Yeah.
so that it can give you complete visibility. I heard that word from you, and
Yes.
to have a framework and visibility, then only you can actually have control over what's really
Yes.
happening on the entire integrated network. Thanks for that. So Aasef, one question for you based on this only. So based on these inputs, how should manufacturers really strike the right balance between IT and OT risk management? Because of course there has to be a balance between the two. You cannot have too much security and you cannot have too less security. So how do you really strike the balance?
Yep, that's correct. So from the security point of view, you can just have security what is needed. So you can't really have more security. There is nothing called as a more security. So if you put instead of 4 firewalls, you're going to get more security. That's not the case. So there is nothing called as a more security. You just need a proper security. So from the point which Mr. Iyer shared earlier, and Srikanth as well. So if you look at from the IT point of view, in IT we are more mature. So there are two approaches really when implementing security controls. You have a top-down approach. So you have a governance, policies, procedures, then you perform risk assessment, you identify a risk mitigation plan, and then you implement the mitigation controls. That's very good for the IT side and is very well mature. And it works very well because you do not have safety and protection, these kind of a concept when it comes to IT. In the manufacturing, you have these concerns. You have a controller, you have a robotic arm, you have safety concerns, you have manufacturing concerns, and when very good and valid concern, which Mr. Iyer shared just now, is the data. Nobody looks at data. So we don't have a mechanism of data classification in the manufacturing industry. It's very well mature in the IT side, but in the OT side, nobody does data classification. If the line diagram or single line diagram or engineering drawing is protected by confidentiality statement, or when the data is going to go to cloud, what is the protection mechanism for this data? How do you classify this data? Because more and more this cloud technology is going to come, manufacturing plants are going to converge through cloud because they want to optimize the production cost. That's the aim at the end, and even resources. Now the same application of top-down approach does not work in the OT side, because now we are talking about machines, we are talking about controllers. So it is always from bottom-up approach. And one good way to understand that is the ISO 62443 mechanism, which has 4 phases of any security implementation: assess, develop and implement, and maintain. So you assess your environment. You could follow a high-level risk assessment, low-level risk assessment. Then you develop your framework, as Mr. Srikanth highlighted. You develop your framework. What security controls are really needed? Do you need data leak prevention technology? Do you need a remote access firewall? So not everything, but what is really needed for my risk appetite. Then you implement that, and you implement to the level as per the maturity of your organization. So you do not just implement, let's say, web application firewall, which is not needed in the manufacturing plant because you're not running a web server there. Just give an example. So you basically implement relevant technologies, and over a life cycle of the technology, you maintain that. So develop, assess, develop, and implement and maintain is a very good cycle. It's available as a reference in IC 62443. A manufacturing industry can follow that guideline. It is designed for ICS and OT vertical, and IC 62443 really comes from manufacturing background. So it comes from the manufacturing industry vertical itself.
So thanks, Aasef. I think good point that you talked about, and I think one key point was about the ISO 62443, the standard, and you talked about the thing, and that actually brings me to the next question, which is of course the importance of tracking and reporting of compliance to such security standards. Mr. Iyer, where do you think we are in terms of adherence to such security standards and the compliance to those standards, and tracking them, making sure that we are actually adhering to them? Where do you think we are on that front?
To be honest, because we are not like OEMs, we are growing as OEM. But the typical tier 1 kind of mindset, if you look into that, we are on the exploration stage. We may say we have certain facilities available already, but with respect to OT, if you look into, we have to do that risk assessment. That is the reason why we as a ACMA member, we are creating a framework for that, so that like-minded people, all CIOs, CIOs, CISOs, we are collecting together and then finding right balance, what we should have, what we should not have. It should not be a overkill, but it should not go beyond a threshold which is creating a security threat for us, despite spending. So, me being a digital technology ACMA member, so we are finding a right balance. So we are in discussion with many different companies of like-minded people. And then to larger extent, we have assessed ourselves where we stand, we know. And we will be deploying it in the phased manner for future. And one of the important things which we have understood in the whole process is you will come to know what is not required. Because without doing a risk assessment, you always feel, I want this also, I want this also. When you try to put yourself on the plant head or maybe the business head role, many things you understand, and then the process of elimination happens, so that when you are doing the planning for future procurement technology deployment, this risk assessment is helping us in many ways. We are also trying to learn more from internal and external discussions with peer companies also.
So I think good point from you, Mr. Iyer. I think it's very important, and you brought up the importance of working with an association, and you're trying to work out a framework, and that can actually be beneficial for the entire fraternity of manufacturing, whoever is part of, say, ACMA. You refer to ACMA. So I think that's a very good step that you're taking, and I'm sure that a framework like that, which is being created jointly with multiple CIOs, is likely to have a greater and wider impact than of one company doing it for just themselves. So I think that's a very, very good point from your side. I think as we are reaching the end of the webinar, so I'm just going to ask one last question to all three, as a conclusive question in terms of for this entire thing. So what are some of the security best practices that manufacturers should really adhere to today, now that we are in the IT and OT integration space? So maybe we can start with Srikanth. Maybe you can start off, and then we'll move to Mr. Iyer, and then finally Aasef, you could conclusion on that. And then there's, I think, a question also. Maybe we can just take up that question. So Srikanth, over to you.
As a best practices, you should identify the crown jewels, the main thing where OT areas, crown jewels, what are they? Identify that and assign a risk-based methodology, and build a strong security culture in the organization by giving an awareness and other things. Vendor risk assessment to be done in the OT area also, since the IT matured, that the OT area also vendor risk assessment to be there, since there are third parties installing the tools and other things. So vendor risk management also to be done, and the continuous threat detection, vulnerability management to be done in IT as well as in OT also. So that is one thing, and instant response to be done in any of the IT or OT, instant response to, and follow the best practices and as per the standard. This is what my.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Iyer. Over to you.
See, because the OT, we are specifically concentrating on OT. The experience which we have understood is the ecosystem also needs to have that maturity model getting developed. There is a bit gap over there, because they are also trying to test the waters, because they never got the opportunity of deploying at different scale. So the ecosystem also needs some gearing up factor. There is no doubt that awareness is required and risk assessment, etc., is required. The important thing is the manufacturing workforce educating on security related is going to play a very vital role, because how will they be informed if something is going to happen to them? Because anything not happening the way it was supposed to happen, because they are very clear on manufacturing. They are not bothered about till the machine is going down. They are not bothered about what is happening. They wanted to do the production. So we have to see if you find any deviations or any information which is getting displayed onto your HMI on the today's available infrastructure also, they normally ignore. So awareness of understanding what is being told to you is more crucial than of getting the remaining risk assessment or the remaining things. After having risk assessment deployment, if they are not going to follow and act on the information which they are getting, you are as vulnerable as you have zero security related product deployed. So this is one of the things which third party ecosystem to have some improvements. Number two, the workforce and the mindset, forget about mindset, that will change. But acting on right time, getting the right input is going to play a vital role.
I think very valid point. Awareness is important, but if you don't do anything after being aware, then it's as good as not really having security in the first place. So very valid point. Aasef, over to you.
Yep. So I'll basically add to the value added points provided by Mr. Iyer and Mr. Srikanth, because those are very valuable points. I'm not going to repeat those points. I'll add on top of that is basically these 3 points. So one point is basically the manufacturing industry is not really new. It's like been there for 50 years and 30 years. So we have some brownfield implementations. How do we implement security on those controls? We need to follow some security hygiene, and I've highlighted in my presentation one of the point. If something is not needed in that system, it should not be there. Just disable that. It will solve a lot of problems. So disable that, follow some security hygiene for the brownfield implementation. It does not require any, buying product or something. It says internal improvement can be researched, can be engineered and applied in the brownfield environment. If there is second point, if there is a greenfield deployment, look for a integrated solution that comes as part of the automation solution itself. So that basically we call it embedding security within the platform itself. So look for a solution where the security is embedded in the platform. So buy some systems or automation platforms that comes with the security solutions embedded into it. It wasn't the case some 30 years back because there was no security concern for those plants. Now these attacks are growing and you will be victim of these attacks. It's like when it will happen, that's the case here. It's not like it will happen or not, when it will happen, that's the case. So any new implementation, which is greenfield implementation, look for an integrated and embedded security solution that comes as part of the platform. And third point, have some kind of a detective technology that can provide you active intelligence or actionable intelligence, we call it. So we need some kind of a centralized visibility with the zero trust, where we know if a controller failed or a machine failed is not because of a physical damage, it's not because of a power failure, it's not because of a malfunction, it's because of a security incident. So we need that kind of intelligence into the environment. So these are 3 points I would just summarize. And there are 110 points available in IC 62443 that can be applied into the manufacturing plant, but that may not be relevant, may be relevant for a bigger plant, and can be done in a gradual way, like depending on the maturity of the company. So somebody can be a Procter & Gamble that may have highest maturity, and somebody may be a small scale manufacturing plant just with 2, 3, 4 production lines doing some small manufacturing. So it may not be applicable for that plant even. So it differs from manufacturing plant to plant. So that's my view on this.
Thanks, Aasef. I think very well summed up in terms of some of the best practices to follow, both for brownfield as well as greenfield projects. I think we'll do a quick audience Q&A now, because I noticed some questions that have come in the chat from the audience. One is about the efficiency of the SD-WAN, that solution with Fortinet, and somebody is just trying to understand the SD-WAN solution from Fortinet. Would you like to talk about that, Aasef?
Yes, so when it comes to multi-site connectivity, so typically all these plants used to be connected with, I would call it dial-up connections, very old times, like you dial in, you get the access, you're connected. And that dial-up access used to be very expensive. Let's say it's provided by, let's say from ISP or is provided by local service provider. So it used to be very expensive. So they started using ISDN lines, okay, lease lines. We can directly connect and have that access. Now it grew and became like internet. So for potential work, we have ISDN line itself. We have internet for other work. Now, how do you really automate all this infrastructure? So we used to have WAN automation, and we used to call it as software-defined WANs. But what Fortinet offers is a secure SD-WAN. So it's just not the SD-WAN, which calculates your bandwidth, which calculates your usage, which calculates the cost of utilizing XYZ link. So you don't want a user to access, let's say, Twitter on ISDN link. For that, you're paying like thousands and millions. So how do you really automate this whole thing? Through a secure channel. So that's what Fortinet offers. I'm just summarizing the broader view of SD-WAN, and this can be controlled through software. So that's why it's known as software-defined WAN with the security, because it's part of the firewall portfolio. So it's a secure SD-WAN. So just not the SD-WAN, but secure SD-WAN, which can automate your WAN connectivities through a software platform and enable basically cost saving as well as security for the infrastructure.
Okay, thanks. So one question, I think it could be answered by all three of you or any of you, is in terms of what feature is really required for OT endpoint security. If there's any OT system antivirus or something, I think it's about OT endpoint security. So is there any suggestion on that front? What sort of features are really required for that? So anyone can.
You want me to answer? I can answer that. So when you're looking at the features, first of all, you need to understand what system you want to target. You may have, as I mentioned, like brownfield deployment, running Windows XP system that may not even support an agent there for the endpoint. That may not even support the antivirus. And one false notion, basically, which was very common in the older times, and I have assessed so many plants during my work as a consultant. They have systems that came as part of the package, turnkey package, and that had the antivirus installed by the automation vendor. And it was running our antivirus definition like 10 years back, like 2001 or 2002. So there is no benefit of having that antivirus. It's consuming the HMI resources, not even protecting anything or securing anything on that endpoint. So look at a solution that passively inspects something, which now there are many things coming up because of the technology innovation like machine learning and artificial intelligence, which understands whether the process running in the HMI is a legitimate process or not legitimate process, which understands the hashes and everything. So look for a solution which has a minimal footprint on the HMI and has a passive inspection capability. So it does not disrupt any automation processes on the HMI. Low footprint agent, enabled with AI or machine learning technology, which understands the automation processes and does not cause any intrusive damage to the HMI. So that's critical point for selecting any endpoint solution.
Okay. Any of the other panelists want to add something on that, or should we move on to the next question? We'll move to the next question, which is again, I think, related to this only. And somebody is making a comment that most of the vendors don't really want endpoint security like AV on HMIs or systems that are attached. How do you really tackle this?
So very true. So this basically comes, as I said, like look for a solution which comes as part of the automation platform itself. So all these automation vendor, now we are dealing with a lot of automation vendor, and there are OT specific endpoint security solutions, because it's becoming more and more crucial for protecting the endpoints, because we can protect the outside attack by putting firewall and IDS and etc. How about the inside attack? That person is sitting on the HMI and just exploiting innocently something else on the HMI. So how do you identify that? So there are specific agents designed for ICS and OT environment, and those are vetted and certified by the automation vendor. They have tested that with their HMI platforms, for example. So look for a solution that comes as part of the bundle package, not the solution that requires active updates or antivirus updates, but a solution that understands the HMI processes. There are agents available, and FortiEDR is one of the example. Basically, it's coming from the manufacturing background. A product basically we acquired from Encilo. The company we acquired used to be the Encilo. It was designed for ICS and OT vendor systems and vendors, and used to protect the endpoints in that environment. Now we changed that as a FortiEDR. So we made as a part of our Fortinet security fabric. So this is one of the example I'm just giving, but there are ways how these agents, which has very, let's say, 6 MB footprint on the HMI and cause only 1% of the CPU time for the HMI, and provides very good features. So that can be applied to this environment, and it can be vetted and certified by the automation vendor.
Okay, thanks. I think good point on that. Last question, since we are out of time, and I think somebody's saying that there was a point where you suggested around 47 processes and technologies that are already in place. Is there any end to adding defense or layers to this onion model? I mainly, and the person is saying that new layers keep on coming with new attacks and fixing them with a new layer. So is there any end to that?
Well, as I've said, there is no more security. Again, it goes back to what is your risk factor, and I think Mr. Iyer summarized that already. So what is your risk appetite? How much money you want to spend? So there are at least different levels of security control. So it starts with 0 level to 5 level. So you have maturity curve starting from 0 to 5. And the basic idea is you should have defensive, detective security mechanism, then defensive security mechanism, then offensive security mechanism. So when it comes to detective, at least you need intelligence into your environment, what data is being utilized. So it starts with the data, which is basically relying on the controllers or systems, then goes on to the network, who is accessing the data from the network, then goes on to the external network, who has access from the external sources, and then policies and procedures. So if you look at the diagram I showed earlier, you have the host, then you have the data, then you have the network, and then you have the external connections or policies and procedures. So the concept is not going to change. Ultimately, you want to protect data really and process oriented aspects of that data. So what level of security controls you want to ensure for protecting one HMI? First of all, you will implement an endpoint security solution, then a network layer to protect and isolate that HMI, then a user access control layer where you identify that user who is accessing and who is not accessing, or who should have access and who should not have access, and then a policy and procedure to govern that asset. So it really boils down to really 4 layers of controls. It's not really many, and it's a standard approach. It doesn't really deviate. But on the top of that, if you want to, let's say, I'll give one example only for network layer. Up in the network layer, you implement segmentation. That's the basic control. You segment your network into multiple segments, and you have identification, who is accessing, and authorization, who is accessing that segment. Somebody who want to have slightly better control, they can have a micro segment. In the segment itself, they can create a small islands where they have controllers separated into each zone. But that's again depend, do you have that kind of a risk into your environment, somebody exploiting a segment, or do you have just segment enough for your environment? So it goes back to the exercise of identifying your risk, identifying your vulnerabilities and threats, and then deciding your security implementation or security controls.
Thanks, Aasef. I think very well rounded off. I think it kind of also puts a lot of things in a nutshell in terms of having an ITOT integrated network and what should be the approach. It's not layers after layers, but actually limited number of layers, and how much security you put in is also up to your appetite and what's really happening. So I think very well rounded. So thank you, gentlemen, for making it such an interactive session and walking us through some of these essentials that in security that can really make a difference. Thanks, Mr. Iyer. Thanks, Srikanth. Thank you, Fortinet, for partnering with us for this technology session. And on behalf of Cybermedia and DataQuest, I also thank all the participants who joined today and who actually been asking questions, interacting, listening to us patiently. And I think this webinar will also be available as a video on demand on DataQuest YouTube channel, so that in case somebody wants to refer to it later, they can do that. And so with that, we will call it the day today. But before that, I think I'll request you to share your feedback from the form that will soon be available to you on your screen. So with that, thank you, gentlemen, once again for this wonderful interactive session. I think it was really great. And so we'll now just sign off. I think, Ashok, do we wait for you to show the feedback form, or can we just sign off?
No, sir, you can sign off. It will.
Thank you, Mr. Anil. Thank you, Mr. Iyer. Thank you, Mr. Srikanth. And it has been very interactive session.
Thank you.
For your
Thanks
time.
a lot. Thank you, Aasef. Thank you, Anil. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And signing off, this is Anil Chopra once again.
Bye.
And stay home, stay safe, and keep reading DataQuest. Thank you. Bye-bye.